start is pretty simple. We're going to start at 1 point with a starting stitch. And we're going to stitch along the border of it. Because this star is pretty big, it's about 25 centimeters, you can make your chain stitch a little bit elongated. So each of these loops that I'm doing are about 2 to 3 millimeters, and you should do it about this length, because then when we kind of brick layer them all together, it's going to give a nice broad texture to the star. Now when we get to the one of the pivotal points, we make a small stitch, just a little 1-point stitch, and that will keep our stitch in place, and then we pivot, and then we keep going in the next direction. Now there's some overlap with the other stars in this pattern. Because this is the big star and it's going to be kind of in the background with some smaller stars overlapping it, I would say just keep stitching the whole thing, because once we put in the other stars, it's going to be sewn on top of it anyways. Now if you like a more flat texture, then you're going to have to kind of get around the overlap. So we're going to do the same thing. Here we're going to make a small stitch. I kind of miscalculated here, so I'll make a little stitch and then one more little stitch at the point, and then pivot, and then keep going in the new direction. I mean, here it's a little bit wobbly. It doesn't matter too much because we're going to overlap it anyways. So you just kind of get the general direction, kind of cover it with some stitches, and that'll be good enough. I'm sorry it's off screen. I can't move it right now. Ugh. I'm coming back up the other side and then you can see me. So one thing I want to emphasize with this star pattern is because we're doing a fulfilling stitch, you really want to make sure that the chain stitches are kind of consistent in length, unless you're going for that kind of messy texture. I'll do messy and then regular chain stitch length so that you can see the difference, but I'm going to do it with different arms of the star, and you can choose however you want to do it, but I'll show you both. And depending on your artistic style, I mean, some people want it to be completely perfect and exact. In that case, you're going to have to take out stitches every so often to make sure all of your chain stitches are exactly on the line. But I like to kind of have a loose freestyle kind of arrangement, so the star doesn't need to be exactly totally precise. If you get the general shape, I think that's good enough. But again, that's your artistic style. So to end the stitch, you've got to do one little stitch, and then you're gonna poke through, go back down into that hole or right next to it, loop again, and then pull up through the loop. Oh crap. Well, sometimes that happens too. So we'll do it again. You just catch the loop and then you keep stitching. And then we're going to get to the end. So I'll get to the end here, and then I'll make a little stitch. I'm going to pull it up, and then I'm going to poke my needle through, back down. You can get next to the hole and then pull up the thread again, and that should pull down the other loop, and then you're going to do it again. It's like double knotting when you end something. And then that's it. And I'm going to take a scissor and cut it. Now you can cut off these threads here. Because this is see-through, I think I'm just gonna cut it here. Usually I might take my needle and poke it through and then loop the thread around and pull it down under. But because this material is see-through, I'm just going to cut it. Sorry, you can't really see it, but here it is. Cut. So now you have a clean star. So here I've stitched part of the star already, and some things I want to point out here is on the right side of each arm, I've stitched a more freestyle, kind of easygoing type of stitch, chain stitch, sorry. And you'll see it's kind of more loose. There's some space in between the chain stitches. Also, compared to this left side where the stitches are a lot more dense, I put these two next to each other so that you can see how they look differently, and you can choose to do whichever style you like. For me, I like the freestyle because it just looks a little bit more like someone took a pencil and kind of sketched out this and filled out this star. So I'm going to go over how to do the freestyle, and then after that I'm going to show you how to do the more densely populated chain stitch. So now I'm going to start by doing the freestyle chain stitch on this right side of the arm. And before we start, I took a white pen and drew a line down the center that I'll kind of use as a guideline as to where to stop. And if you're not too comfortable with chain stitch and having kind of a control over the direction and straightness, what I recommend you do is you just take the pen and just kind of draw out the general direction of the stitches, and that will help you to keep everything in line while you stitch. Especially if you're a beginner, you kind of need those guidelines because you're going to be spending so much of your energy and concentration on just trying to do the chain stitch. So to get this look, we start with the ending stitch here. Now with this freestyle stitch, you got to just kind of keep close to the edge, but you don't have to be super close, so it doesn't take so much attention. Just stay within the general white lines that you drew. Now, one thing to note is, and I hope you can see it here, so you see where I put the needle down? I'm putting it halfway between the previous chain stitch. So I'm talking about the outline of the star here. You see there's a chain stitch, and then there's another one where my needle came down in the middle. When you do stitches like what we're doing now to fill up an area, you want to make sure that you kind of brick layer your chain stitches, because that will make the light kind of reflect off of it in a varied fashion, and that gives it more sparkle. So we're just going to do that. Brick layer, brick layer, brick layer. And then when you get to the end, you're going to come down one full stitch and then one little itty bitty stitch come down, come back up, and then you're just going to go to the next line. And I'm going to start halfway again. And then we just keep going. So the nice thing about these fulfilling chain stitches is that you can be kind of messy, and that's how the texture will look, and it won't look imperfect. I mean, if you like the style where everything has to be exact, like architectural sketches, then you're going to have to use a ruler to draw these lines, and you're going to have to stay exactly on these lines. If that's your style, then you go ahead and do that. So I'm going to make another teeny tiny little chain stitch on the edge here, and then we come back again and do the next row. So just to note, I mean, you can always skip out on using gold thread. You can always use regular DMC threads with solid colors. You can take different colors and mix them. So put 2 and 2 threads, split them, and then put it together as one whole. And you know, if you don't like the direction, like here where it kind of got bent, I mean, I would have liked it to stay more in line like this. So you can always take it back out. You just kind of pull it, pull until you get to where you want. I'm going to redo here. So now I'm going to do the more densely populated chain stitch, and I'm going to do it starting here. So when you do a densely populated chain stitch, you want to poke your needle right next to the previous layer, because you want to make sure that there's almost no space between your next layer and the previous layer. Now, if you don't know how to do a starting chain stitch, I also will put out a tutorial for that. Please leave a comment and request it. Now, when you come down on the brick layer, you want to make sure you put it halfway between. You see this chain stitch here. It starts here and it ends here. So you want to make sure you put the next one right in the middle. And when you do that, make sure you put your needle right next to it. And so you see when you pull the thread, it sits right next to the previous layer. And when you do that, it will make a more densely populated chain stitch. Now when you get to the end, you do the exact same thing. You make a little itty bitty chain stitch, and then you just come back to the next layer. And when you do that, make sure you do it halfway. You have to do a brick layer all the way. Now you get to the end and you make a little itty bitty chain stitch again, and then come back up and do the same thing again on the next layer.